For many people, their faith is the central thing of which they have built their lives around and their sense of up and down and right and wrong. For other people, it could be particular books that they've read. It could be any sort of philosophies, right? For me, I grew up as the grandchild of people that had served in World War II. I was fascinated not just by the stories of battle, but also by the stories of the communities and thus country that they were able to build. It's one that I believe was the best version of ourselves, and it is one that I think we often stray from. And tomorrow is a very significant day in the recognition of the end of World War II. Tomorrow will mark 80 years since the end of VJ Day, Victory over Japan, often known as Victory in the Pacific, and of course the famous dancing man through the streets of Sydney and George Street on that incredible day when Australia had learnt that the Japanese had finally surrendered, principally after the 2 atomic attacks from the United States, which were absolutely necessary because Japan was not going to give up. Japan was willing to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of its own, and it was an incredibly painful time. Now, in World War II, 17,000 Australians died in the direct conflicts with Japan. When it came to Japan, Japan attacked Australia. They got as far down as Sydney with the mini-subs. Of course, they hit Broome, and most notably, they hit the port of Darwin. There were also tens of thousands of families who were affected by the more than 22,000 Australian prisoners of war, whose emaciated bodies marked cruel and unusual punishment that was coming from the Japanese. Bamboo under the fingernails, you know all of the stories because you may well have a family member who told them to you. Now, tomorrow, the 15th, is the anniversary of the surrender from the Japanese. Now, I refer to it as the defeat of the Japanese. And what has been incredible is the story between Australia and Japan in the 80 years since. Horrible things were done to Australians. Now, often we discuss things like intergenerational trauma, meaning the problems of today that can be linked back to horrific events of the past. But for some reason, this is never applied to World War II. This is never applied to Vietnam. This is never applied to Korea. This is never applied to those prisoners of war. What is incredible about the story between a country that literally bombed and killed people here, as well as imprisoning football stadiums of soldiers and working them in many ways to their death, and of course the many thousands of people who died successfully repelling the Japanese, is that incredibly, just 12 years after that war, an Australian Prime Minister went to Japan. Robert Menzies, who many like to hold up, of course, because of his values when it comes to the Liberal Party, but they also say that he represents this particular period of time that was backward-looking. Well, of course, he decided to go to Japan and to start to build what became normalised relations. Think about that, within 12 years of a war. Now, there are plenty of stories around the world to this day where the wars of hundreds of years ago are still being used as the justification for the anger that exists between countries. That anger does not exist anymore between Australia and Japan. In fact, Japan is well and truly considered a friend because it has become one. That Prime Minister was the first of many who has actually embraced Japanese leaders and been to Japan, many of them over many decades, many who may well have been, of course, the sons and daughter of people who had fought in World War II. These are incredible signs about how we dealt with the immense tragedies that are marked by the end of World War II 80 years ago on the 15th. Japanese Prime Ministers have been to Australia, but amazingly, it was only about 3 years ago that a Japanese Prime Minister was in Australia and went to Darwin specifically. 2018, the best part of 7 years ago. What a moment to see Shinzo Abe, whose life sadly was taken just a couple of years ago. standing at the very site where, in a different era and a different time, there was war. War that Japan was waging on Australia, and Australia was defending itself with such incredible cost. When Australia was in the middle of World War II, we didn't have 27 million people, the same as in World War I, when we didn't have 27 million people. Generations have been lost in every single country town and, of course, every major suburb of Australia. Families have been changed forever, but the incredible story of how the difficulties, the hurt and the hatreds have been tried to be put to bed over the past 80 years. It is yet again an example of why the World War II generation is the greatest generation, because not just that they fought and that they defended, not just that they suffered, but that they rebuilt and they recovered. And within their lifetimes, the foe had become a friend. Again, this is the central foundation and plank under which I have begun and built my conception of this country, through those incredible people, their amazing kids, and those of us that were lucky enough to be their grandkids. Of course, for my children, they won't have the honour of being able to meet their great-grandparents who did these incredible things. And I'm talking about everything from the Women's Land Army and the Home Front, talking, of course, about many people when it came to national service, and, of course, those who went overseas and those who came back with the scars of knowing that literally the person next to them may have suffered the worst fate of all, or the near worst fate of all, of that being a prisoner of war. Well, somebody who wrote exquisitely about this week is somebody that I want to turn your attention to and praise at the start of this evening's show. Alexander Downer was the Foreign Minister of Australia and the longest serving one. He remains actively interested in the defence of Australia, as you saw earlier this week in that sensational program, The War Cabinet. If you're watching us live, it'll be replayed on Saturday, live on the Sky News channel, or you can go and find it at skynews.com.au. And I agree with almost every word of what he wrote about this incredible journey that these two countries, but let's talk about it from our perspective, our country has gone on in the 80 years from when Japan was bombing, imprisoning and killing Australians, to now a level of interrelationship and friendship where they are amongst our closest allies. We are involved in the fights of the 21st century with the people who caused so much difficulty, or the nation, I should say, that caused so much difficulty for us in the last century. Alexander Downer wrote this in the Australian newspaper, and again, I want to draw your attention to it. If you can find it online, please do so. Otherwise, I think it was in the paper again a couple of days ago. Reconciling with Japan, a triumph for our nations. The Australian story in post-war Japan is a fascinating one. Robert Menzies, the driver of reconciliation, had spoken out against racial hatred towards Japan even during the war, insisting that it will only be by profound stirring of hearts of men that we will reach such goodwill. These things being said, again, he visited within 12 years of that conflict that had cost us so much. Mr. Downer goes on to say about the relationship and the decades since, where Australian resources helped drive the Japanese post-war economic miracle. Australian businesses and the broader population have gained great prosperity from exports to Japan. The Commerce Agreement, which was highly controversial at the time, for those who know their history, of course, bitterly opposed by the Labor Party and the ACTU. In fact, they marched in the streets against it because, of course, many of the workers at the time were the people who had, of course, gone to war. And then he speaks quite personally because he had family that was, yes, in the prisoner of war camps. The final transition of my family from Japanophobes to Japanophiles came when my daughter was posted as a young diplomat to Tokyo and gave birth to my first grandchild, Henry, in a hospital in Japan. So our family, our experience with Japan through 3 generations was to go from a prison camp to a maternity ward. I know this is a lot of quoting here, but I think this is important. Last bit. The only one thing that I would like Japan to do, the only one more thing he wants to do, and I agree with this, is that I would like it to allow the building of a suitable memorial to the thousands of Allied POWs who were transported to Japan and made to work for slave labour. This is the last incomplete step in reconciliation. That last word, of course, means so much in so many different areas of Australian society. But the greatest generation to go through that level of change within their life should be a guide and example to all other forms of trauma that have existed in our histories, not to be forgotten, to always be taught, to always be understood. But also, the story post their suffering is one worth celebrating and marking. In many ways, it is why we talk about the things that we talk about the way that we talk about them, because the values, and not all of those values are overtly of one political side or another, but their values, in my view, are the most pure of Australian values. And they earned the right to be deeply bitter. But oh, so many of them were not. And oh, so many of their children and grandchildren were part of a process of that rehabilitation and eventual reconciliation. To the greatest generation, I forever and with every heartbeat say thank you. To the children of the greatest generation, thank you for continuing their work in the suburbs and in the communities. To their grandchildren and the Gen Xers like me, it is our responsibility to continue that legacy, something that I hope we can do each and every time we talk here on the show. Now, of course, that greatest generation would at times find many of the things we discuss in 2025 to just be boggling. The idea that down is up is down, black is white, grey is the most important colour because it is no colour because we see no colour. You get the point, right? But we have gone through a really strange journey in, say, let's say the past 20 years, because a certain type of thinking has taken over our institutions, and those institutions have fed into the lobbying of governments and some of the loudest voices that are around. And while I won't bore you and bring out a chalkboard, although one night I probably should go the full Glenn Beck for you, something that has become at the absolute heart, when you think about those stories where you go, hang on, why are we talking about this? The stuff that when you get pushed back, you get called a culture warrior for, is because there's a concept called post-modernism. And this is a central belief that can be partially explained, but perhaps best explained, by saying that everything you have learnt is wrong because everything you have learnt has been set up by people who made choices to advance themselves. Now, I disagree with this completely, but I'm very across what the concept of postmodernism is. It means that national borders shouldn't really be enforced because we're all one group of people. After all, the nation state is just invented by people. We get to the scenario where everything you've learnt in the education system, like maths, is apparently racist because, of course, the version of it that you're taught is not the one that others have known for tens and hundreds of thousands of years before that. You get the point. It's a long string. But if you want to go right back to the very heart and to try to understand how some people feel the way they do about what they want to change about everything in our society, if you read up and learn a little bit about postmodernism, you'll probably be able to get there. I've told the story a couple of times before, but for those who haven't heard it, I'll gladly repeat. I was very lucky to be able to go to university. I didn't really qualify. I was like the 15th round in, and it was an experience that changed my life. But it was a very weird one, and it was a very lefty one, and a big part of what we discussed at university all those years ago was things like postmodernism. Now, I understood it. I was able to write an essay about it, but I also knew there were limits to if you undo everything, then what's the point? We've kind of built a pretty good society by making the choices that we have. But I remember once this post-modern class we were sitting in, and a lecturer walks in and says, "Class, what do you see out the window?" Idiot me. A tree. Probably said miss because you thought you had to still talk like you did at school. The lecturer, no. It is not a tree. You only think it's a tree because you've been told it's a tree. That's the weirdness of postmodernism. And on top of that have become things like gender theory. This is the idea about gender fluidity. that not everyone with a penis is a boy, and the same, vagina for girls, and there's all of these spectrums and all of the different colours of the rainbow. And the truth is that just like science learns lots of ways, and what we used to say call this thing, well, there's 15 versions of that thing now, which means they don't treat you with one big swatch, they sort of get little slices along the way. And again, this is part of the gender theory thing. And the postmodern conversation is that the only reason boys are boys and girls are girls is because somebody has drawn a line. And if you don't draw a line, then the natural self will end up sitting somewhere on a spectrum. Now, I don't believe that when it comes to kids. If you truly believe that you have been born in the wrong body, then we've got to do everything we can emotionally to help someone. But we certainly, in my view, shouldn't be medically intervening in a growing body. I think this about also many mental health drugs when it comes to a growing brain. You've got to be careful when you do all of these things. But I also am very respectful of the idea that there are adults amongst us who have gone on a journey where they don't quite fit into this or that, and that's their business, and they deserve the respect of being able to live their lives. Now, of course, there are limitations to that about male sports and women's sports, so I'm not here trying to sneak something under the side door, but I just respect and I understand that there's adults of lots of different types. But please leave the kids alone. As you'll have heard today, Jacinta Allen got pretty pissed off because she was being confronted by the reporting in the Australian newspaper today that I won't read to you because you know about it all already, which is that kids as young as 5 are being told that you may well have been born in the wrong body, that your bits do not match the bits that you would wish, which build the identity of which the sex and gender you wish to be, or that you know yourself to be. But what was amazing was that the Premier was all huff and puff like the big bad wolf when she was being confronted by, at times, the sheer absurdity of where this postmodern theory has taken us, that up is down, that left is right, that nothing you know is correct because all of it was handed down by some previous evil generation. You know, the same previous evil generation that was able to transition from fighting wars and being prisoners to being eventual, at a nation level at least, friends with their former captors. Well, this was part of her carry-on, and she was doing it to the reporter who, their only sin was to actually show what the Allen government is doing with some kids in primary school in Victoria.
So this ongoing campaign against the respectful relationships by the Australian speaks about, does not recognise the transformative difference this program is making every single day in schools.
And then when again the questions continue, the huff and the puff and the aggro that was all there, because of course defending the rights of trans kids is simply more important than some of the basic building blocks and logic. Because you see, if you can question the basic building blocks of gender in kids, well then everything is up for grabs. You've successfully dismantled everything. Back to that reason I was taking such a time to explain postmodernism to you. Again, her reaction when being confronted with reporting about what her government is doing.
It should be stopped. It's disgraceful reporting. It's hurtful. When you consider the incidents that transgender kids are 15 times more likely to kill themselves, we should be supporting them. We should be supporting them across our schools, across our society, across our community. The Australia needs to stop this ongoing campaign because it's hurtful and harmful.
See, I think in many ways what she's saying there is pretty cowardly. There are trans kids, and there are kids that believe that they are of the wrong gender who are seriously having troubles. And yes, there is a lot of statistics about kids who go through such trauma that they end up in serious need of serious assistance. And there is not a decent person watching us who does not believe that that person should have the full counselling, the full ability, the full power to be able to deal with what they're dealing with. But that doesn't mean that that should become the rule. It can become the exception to the rule, and we should have all the documentation and all of the things to help that are not medical intervention. But as a kid is learning about how 1 + 1, about A, B and C, that the fundamentals like that can be challenged about whether you're a boy or a girl, as a rule, as opposed to when a kid is showing signs of this difficulty, there being a separate process to help them through it. Instead, in my view, it is about just removing the simple classification at all about boys and girls, and that is part of the postmodern project. There are many who say nasty things about trans people because they either think it's going to rile a bunch of people up or it's what they actually believe. I am not one of those people. I'm not somebody who is telling you here that it must be rainbow flags at dawn and all of that business. I'm not saying any of that to you. What I'm saying to the Premier of Victoria is, yes, we need a support system for the kids who need it, but we don't need a system that opens up potential need for support to all kids. Once you hit 16 and 17 and 18 is when, yes, you could be moving through a deeper process that upon your 18th birthday could move into a more medicalised field. Now, me even having this conversation is going to result in a whole bunch of complaint emails, but the spirit is trying to say, if you are a trans person, we see you and we love you like we love everyone in our community. If you're a kid that's having difficulty, I want the most amount of support for you. But I also don't want a system that tries to knock out the obvious, that up is up, down is down, boy is boy, and girl is girl. Many have responded to what has been happening today, and particularly the attitudes of the Premier. Here's somebody who was talking to Chris a bit earlier tonight.
I think it's incredibly alarming, both the content and the fact that the Victorian Premier is so in full force behind it. I mean, what a terrible message to be sending young kids that they are somehow born wrong or have the wrong body parts. And not only is it ridiculous, but it's incredibly confusing and harmful for these children. If the Premier really, really cared about these vulnerable, gender-confused children, then she would be looking into the gender affirmation model that is rampant throughout the healthcare system in Victoria and is putting these children on these irreversible and harmful medical pathways.
Can you know what you think of all different stripes and however you do it and how maybe you have had to deal with this in and around your family? I'd love to know. I'd love to read and I'll gladly respond to as many as I can. paul@skynews.com.au. A couple of other things before we get into an excellent conversation this evening. Surprise, surprise, exactly what we thought about the economic roundtable is true. They already know what the conclusions are before it has taken place. The Prime Minister and the Treasurer are getting ready for, essentially, a whole bunch of people to give them ideas about what they plan to do with the term, which is kind of like getting a job and then saying, hey, can you tell me what I'm going to do with it? Anyway, that's the way they're playing. We know one of the big decisions that will come out of this has already been flagged by The Guardian. We're going to move towards a universal childcare system. It will not be free. However, it will be something like for everyone, regardless of whether you are a pauper or a prince or princess or all other variations, to be consistent here. Well, that'll be about, $10, $15 a day. We also know that they've already worked out what the key things are that are going to come out of it because the ABC has been able to work out that there is a pre-written list prepared for Cabinet, seen by the ABC, that shows the advice from Treasury when it comes to things like the National Construction Code. It also recommends measures to speed up housing approvals, environmental red tape, i.e. to remove it and make sure that they end up with more renewable energy all over the place and particular focus in and around housing. Now, despite the fact he's been caught red-handed, and we know how rigged this whole thing is anyway, the Prime Minister was trying to pretend it's not rigged.
It's now been proposed in those documents. Are you now open to that?
Well, nothing's been proposed. Governments decide things. Let's be very clear. Governments decide. There's no cabinet documents out there. There's no cabinet proposals. We're awaiting the forum.
All right, well, we'll see what happens. Interesting to remember our conversation with Philip Curry from the Financial Review, who was saying of all of those people in business that are going to be brought forward and are going to be turning up at this round table, that they will not be played like a fiddle like they were at the Jobs Summit a couple of years ago, or of course way back when it was Kevin Rudd and the Butcher's paper at the 2020 Summit in 007.
A lot of them have been invited back to this one, mainly the big groups like the Business Council and the Australian Industry Group and the Chamber of Commerce, but they're going in with eyes wide open this time. And I know I've spoken to a few of them. They said if we get a whiff of that happening again, they're going to walk out.
Let's see. Will there be walkouts? Will there be no turn-ups? We'll all find out together. It'll be fun. And we are here knowing that they've already worked out what they want to do. We'll discuss that in a moment or two's time with, among others, the wonderful Joe Hildebrand. Now, as you know, racism everywhere. Now, there's real racism, like those loons and losers who were marching in Melbourne in the middle of the night on the weekend. But this garbage that, only white people catch, picked up by taxis, and if you're a person of colour, you won't be allowed into a lift by an evil white man. We told you last night about the apparent racism that exists in maternity wards all over Queensland because apparently they heard about a joke. We'll get ready for the next one, which is the performer at the AFL Grand Final, Snoop Dogg, D-O-G-G, for those who like to spell it correctly. Well, he's coming out here, going to be paid a pretty penny, and he'll do his little thing. And some people have turned around and go, oh, really? And in many ways it's because it's yet another boatload of money to an international artist. This is the same thing that happens every year, right? Is it worth paying the same amount of money to an overseas artist that we could pay to an Australian artist? Well, racism. Because according to a former AFLW player, for the first time we have this precedent where a black artist is coming to headline one of the biggest sporting events in Australia, and you have all this propaganda and hate towards him when there's none of that when it came to Katy Perry or other Caucasian people. Really? This comes back to the casual racism and blunt racism that continues to happen in sports. What? How can we expect our fans not to be racist to the players? Blah, blah, blah. Well, of course, the reality is that when Katy Perry was performing at the AFL Grand Final, there was criticism of Katy Perry and how much money we were paying Katy Perry to come out. There was criticism of Kiss. By the way, congratulations on now getting a Kennedy Centre honour. Donald Trump putting them in a special category that'll be awarded later in the year. Well, again, people were annoyed. Why? Because it reminds us of that other sort of old school rocker, Meatloaf. And we didn't like it at the time. So, okay, I get it, but racism everywhere? Maybe not everywhere. All right, while you were working, a little segment we like to do each and every night to show you, while you were working nice and hard, obviously not as hard as the 24/7 Prime Minister. What about those tickets he gave himself yesterday? But the crap that they've been doing on social media while being fully paid by you and I. First, the Health Minister.
That's my baby. She's iconic. iPhone case, lip gloss on it.
Then there's another Labor senator, this one going on about penalty rates.
Are you talking about Marie Antoinette?
Yeah.
I heard a thing or two about her. Is this seat taken?
Oh, our old mate, the one who believes at some point in time she could become Prime Minister. The teal answering the phone.
Okay, hi, it's Monique Ryan here. Philippa, it's Monique Ryan here. Oh, hi, Leanne, it's Monique Ryan here. I'm well, thanks, how are you? Okay, well, I was just calling to say that I've got some good news, actually.
I know how to use the phone, and it's a landline too. Send your complaints to someone else. I don't care about that lady. And finally, a Green who did this with your money today.
If I make this shot, then Labor's got to stop approving new fossil fuel projects, cooking our oceans and our climate.